camera never lied. That's what Michael Grant believed after 23 years on the road. But on the morning of November 3rd, 2018, his dashcam showed him something that couldn't exist. He was alone in the cab, certain of it. The seat beside him had been empty since he pulled out of Spokane. Yet in one frame of the recording, there was someone sitting there. A pale shape, still, facing forward. Michael didn't see it then, but when he reviewed the footage later, the image was undeniable. The dashcam timestamp rolled on, the hum of the engine steady, the road slipping away beneath his headlights. And under all of that, there was something else, a faint sound, too faint to notice unless you listened for it. Breathing, slow, controlled, right beside him. 1 second, the seat is empty. The next, that figure is there. No movement, no blur, just there. And in every frame that followed, it stayed. Watching, waiting. If you'd keep watching after seeing this, you're braver than most. If you'd have pulled over and left the keys in the ignition, you need to subscribe right now. Because what happens next might save your life. Michael Grant was 46 years old the night this happened. A veteran long-haul driver with over 2 decades behind the wheel. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't the type to chase stories or ignore rules of the road. His reputation among other drivers was simple, reliable, and stubbornly consistent. He ran the same routes every month, often preferring the quieter night runs through the back roads. The kind of roads most people avoid unless they have no other choice. November had just begun, and the weather in northern Idaho had turned early. The night air was sharp with ice, and the rain had started falling in sheets, heavy enough to blur the distant tree line into a dark, shifting wall. The dashcam's microphone caught every detail inside the cab, the faint hum of the CB radio, the low mechanical growl of the engine, and the rhythmic click of the windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. On the dash, a sun-faded bobblehead swayed slightly with the movement of the truck, nodding to no one in particular. An open travel mug sat in the cup holder, the stale smell of burnt coffee clinging to the air. Michael had been nursing it since leaving Spokane nearly an hour earlier. The clock on the dashboard read 2:13 a.m. By his estimate, he had another 6 hours before the next major stop. That didn't bother him. Michael liked the solitude of the night, but he had one rule, a superstition, he called it. He never, under any circumstances, picked up hitchhikers. Not at night. Not on these roads. Not after what he'd heard from other drivers over the years. The stories varied. A shadow on the roadside that followed too closely. A passenger who vanished before sunrise. A voice in the CB that no one else could hear. He kept his eyes on the slick, winding highway ahead. The fog was starting to gather low to the ground, curling upward in thin fingers. Then, without warning, the dashcam feed skipped. Just a fraction of a second. Barely enough to notice unless you were looking for it. But in that single, distorted frame, the lighting inside the cab seemed wrong, darker, like something was sitting between the dash and the passenger side window, blocking the glow from outside. The feed corrected itself instantly, the seat beside him still empty. Michael didn't react. He didn't even glance toward it. Either he hadn't noticed at all, or he didn't want to. Outside, the road narrowed, the forest pressing closer to the edges of the beam from his headlights. The rain softened, but the fog thickened, swallowing the highway one car length at a time. By 2:40 a.m., Michael's fuel gauge was dropping toward the quarter mark. On this stretch of Highway 95, that meant one option before the next 100 miles, a place he'd stopped at maybe twice in his entire career. The building came into view through the fog long before its sign could be read. A buzzing neon strip framed the roofline, its light struggling against the night. The sign itself was half lit, only the letters UC SOP were glowing. The rest was swallowed in shadow. The asphalt around the station was slick with rain, reflecting the neon glow like a warped mirror. The only movement outside was the steady sway of the single security camera above the front door, turning in slow, mechanical arcs. Michael eased the truck alongside pump number 4, the diesel engine rattling to a stop. The wipers froze mid-swipe, leaving streaks across the glass. For a moment, he just sat there, letting the engine noise fade into the heavy quiet of the early morning. He stepped out into the cold, the rain now more of a mist, hanging in the air like it didn't want to fall. His boots crunched over the grit and gravel. Somewhere out beyond the reach of the station's light, something shifted in the tree line. But when he looked, there was only darkness. Inside, the store was warmer, but no less unsettling. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and floor cleaner, with an undertone of damp cardboard. Rows of shelves stood half empty. Behind the counter was an older man in a trucker cap, the bill so bent it looked like it might snap. His eyes followed Michael from the door to the coffee machine without a word. It wasn't until Michael set his cup down by the register that the man finally spoke. His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in hours. "Fog's moving in. You shouldn't be on this road much longer." Michael glanced toward the door. Through the glass, the night looked thicker somehow. The man kept talking. "If you've got to keep driving, just don't stop near mile 63 rest area." The way he said it wasn't casual. It wasn't advice. It sounded like a rule, one that had been repeated enough times to become ritual. Michael asked why, but the man just shook his head. "You don't want to know." Back outside, the cold hit him sharper than before. The pumps clicked and hummed as the truck's tank filled, each sound too loud in the empty lot. That's when he saw it. By the farthest pump, barely lit by the overhanging canopy, stood a figure, tall, motionless. The rain had dampened their clothing until it clung like a second skin. The head was tilted slightly down, as if they were looking at the ground, but there was no movement, no shifting of weight, no visible breath. Michael didn't call out. He didn't even slow his pace. He replaced the nozzle, climbed back into the cab, and locked the door. The figure never looked up. As the truck pulled out of the lot, the dashcam recorded a faint burst of static, just enough to distort the colors for half a second before the feed returned to normal. That brief flicker left a strange smear of light along the passenger side of the image, as though someone had been standing there in the frame, then vanished when the static cleared. If you've ever ignored a warning because you thought it didn't matter, hit subscribe now. And if you wouldn't, tell me in the comments what made you so cautious. By the time Michael had merged back onto the highway, the station's glow was gone, swallowed behind the wall of black trees and fog. Out here, the road was barely more than a strip of slick asphalt, cutting through an ocean of forest. For the first few minutes, the only sounds were the diesel's steady growl and the rhythmic whisper of the wipers. Michael settled into the drive, eyes forward, shoulders hunched against the cold seeping from the passenger side. Then the CB crackled. A short burst at first, like someone had bumped the mic. Static filled the cab, fading in and out in uneven pulses. Michael reached for the volume knob, assuming it was just another driver testing their radio. But beneath the static, there was something else, a voice. It wasn't clear. The words stretched, pulled apart by interference. But the sound had weight to it, low, close, like it was coming from somewhere in the cab, not through the speakers. He leaned closer to the radio, trying to catch a phrase, and then he heard it. His name, Michael. Not shouted, not called in warning, just spoken. The syllables were slow, deliberate, and in the split second before the static swallowed them again, there was no mistaking it. It was his name in a voice he didn't recognize. Michael sat back, exhaling through his nose. CB pranks weren't new. Other drivers bored on long hauls would sometimes find your name from a call-in or way station check and use it to mess with you. But this didn't sound like that. This didn't sound like someone laughing on the other end of the mic. The fog ahead was thickening. The high beams caught it and threw it back in a white glare, limiting his view to barely 20 feet. Road markers emerged from the whiteness like teeth, flashing past and vanishing just as quickly. Michael adjusted his speed down to 45, both hands gripping the wheel. He wasn't thinking about the voice anymore. He was thinking about the fog. Thick fog on narrow, unlit roads was trouble enough. Thick fog this early in the season, that was unusual. Then, without warning, the dashcam feed glitched, just for a frame. 1/30th of a second. Long enough for the trained eye to catch something, short enough that most people wouldn't notice unless they froze the footage. But that's exactly what Michael did. In the corner of the dashcam screen, passenger side, the seat didn't look empty. It looked occupied. Not in a normal way. The shape was wrong, the proportions slightly off. No defined face, no movement. Just a darker mass against the pale fabric, as if the seatbelt had wrapped around something that wasn't there. Michael blinked and glanced over. The seat beside him was empty. He kept one hand on the wheel and reached out with the other to rewind the playback a few seconds. The tiny screen lit the cab with a cold glow as he stepped back through the footage. Frame by frame, nothing. The seat was empty in every shot. No shadow, no shape, no sign that anything had been there at all. Michael exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his shoulders. He clicked the dashcam back to live view and kept driving. The fog swallowed the road ahead, and the forest on either side seemed to close in even tighter. Somewhere in that white void, a low sound drifted into the cab, so faint he couldn't tell if it came from outside or the seat right next to him. At 3:04 a.m., the fog was at its heaviest. Michael kept his eyes fixed on the dim stretch of road ahead, only glancing at his mirrors when necessary. The forest was gone now, hidden behind the shifting white. The world had shrunk to the truck's cabin and a strip of wet asphalt that seemed to fade into nothing just a few truck lengths away. He checked the driver's side mirror, nothing but swirling mist. Then the passenger side mirror. The beam from the headlights fractured in the fog, making it impossible to tell where the road ended and the air began. And then, the rear view. Just for a second, he thought he saw movement behind him. Not in the road, not in the cargo, but in the cab. The kind of faint shift you catch in your peripheral vision, enough to register as motion, but gone the instant you look straight at it. Michael snapped his eyes forward again. The road ahead hadn't changed. He told himself it was nothing, a trick of fatigue and fog, but later, the dashcam would prove him wrong. In the recording, the moment was clear. The live feed from the forward camera showed the wet road, but in the corner, framed by the passenger seat, something was sitting there. The figure was pale, almost colorless, as if its skin had been washed out by the glare of the dashboard lights. Its head was tilted slightly toward the windshield. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. It just sat, eyes dark and hollow, fixed on the road ahead. Michael didn't know it was there, not yet. He shifted in his seat, adjusting his grip on the wheel. That's when he felt it, a soft click. The seatbelt buckle beside him had just locked into place. His eyes darted right, the seat was empty, but the belt was drawn taut, the buckle angled inward as though someone or something was strapped in. His pulse picked up. He told himself it was a mechanical fault, maybe from the movement of the truck. But then he heard it, breathing. Not loud, not labored, just a steady, controlled inhale and exhale, perfectly in sync with the rumble of the engine. It wasn't coming from the CB. It wasn't coming from the vents. It was coming from no more than 2 feet to his right. The sound mixed with the low hum of the diesel, almost hidden in it, as though it had been there for miles, waiting for him to notice. Michael tightened his hands on the wheel. The road was too narrow to stop safely. The fog was too thick to pull off without risking a collision. He kept driving, staring straight ahead. The dashcam continued to record. In each frame, the figure remained in the same position, unmoving, unblinking. Viewers who have studied that footage frame by frame claim that every few seconds, the head turns slightly toward Michael, but never enough to be certain. If you saw this on your dashcam live feed, would you keep driving or slam on the brakes? I want to see your answer in the comments. By 3:18 a.m., the road felt heavier beneath the tires. Michael kept his eyes locked on the faint lane markings, fighting the hypnotic pull of the fog. The breathing beside him, if it was still there, had faded into the background hum of the engine. Then, without warning, the stereo clicked on. Michael flinched at the sudden burst of sound. It wasn't the modern country station he usually tuned to, or the quiet hiss of a bad signal. This was different. The speakers crackled, then began to play a song that didn't belong on any station in 2018. The recording quality was poor, like it had been pressed onto vinyl decades earlier. A woman's voice sang in a low, echoing tone, backed by a slow piano rhythm. Michael didn't recognize the words, but the melody had a strange pull to it. The kind of tune you feel like you've heard somewhere before, though you can't place when. He reached for the power button. The music cut out for half a second, then came back on, louder. Outside, the fog had shifted from pale white to a darker shade, absorbing the headlights rather than scattering them. The edges of the road seemed to curl inward, as though the highway itself were narrowing. Inside the cab, the air temperature dropped sharply. Michael could see his breath now, each exhale forming a faint cloud in front of him. On the passenger side of the windshield, frost began to spider outward from a single point, spreading in delicate white veins toward the center of the glass. The frost stopped just short of his line of sight, almost as if it were deliberately avoiding his view of the road. But the pattern curved subtly, tracing the outline of where a head and shoulders might be, if someone were sitting in that seat. Michael gripped the wheel harder, his knuckles pale in the dashboard glow. The GPS screen lit up in the corner of his vision, its cheerful blue background a stark contrast to the heavy night outside. The route he'd been following for the past hour had vanished. In its place was a single, pulsing line that curved sharply to the right, leading him off the main highway and onto a narrow, unmarked road. The estimated arrival time and distance had been replaced with one line of text: route updated. Michael hadn't touched the GPS. He hadn't requested a new route. 100 yards ahead, the turn appeared out of the fog, barely visible until his headlights slid across the reflective arrow of a weathered road sign. The sign's metal surface was rusted and pitted, but the letters were still legible under decades of wear. Mile 63 rest area, closed. Since 1985. Michael's jaw tightened. The words of the old cashier came back in perfect clarity. Don't stop near mile 63 rest area. As he passed the sign, the dashcam glitched again. The distortion lasted longer this time, nearly 2 full seconds, long enough to register the shift in the image. The passenger seat was no longer empty. The figure was closer to the camera now, its head tilted slightly toward Michael. In the grainy freeze frame, the outline of a face was visible, skin pale enough to reflect the dashboard light, lips drawn into a faint, fixed line. But the eyes were dark hollows, empty yet fixed in his direction, as though they had been watching him for much longer than the camera had been recording. When the feed corrected itself, the seat was empty again. But the frost on the passenger side glass had deepened, forming tiny rivulets where condensation dripped down from the inside. By 3:13 a.m., the words on that rusted road sign were still in his mind. He'd heard about it before, not often, not from everyone, but enough to know it was a piece of trucker folklore that had survived long past the year the gates were chained shut. They called it the passenger. The story was never the same twice. Sometimes it was a man in an old coat, sometimes a woman in a faded dress, sometimes nothing more than a pale shape in the corner of your eye. But every version carried the same rule. If you see him or it in your cab, you don't stop. Not for fuel, not for food, not for anything. And you never make it to sunrise if you give them a ride willingly. Michael remembered one story in particular, told over black coffee at a rest stop in Montana years ago. The driver's name was Owen McCarthy, a man built like he'd been hauling freight his whole life. He had a habit of talking without blinking, like the images behind his eyes were too vivid to let go of. Owen claimed it happened in '92, during a winter run southbound toward Boise. Heavy fog, much like tonight. He'd seen the mile 63 rest area sign and figured he'd stop for a nap. The place was deserted, or at least it looked that way. He'd parked, shut down the engine, and climbed into the sleeper. Said he woke an hour later to the sound of the passenger door clicking shut. Thought maybe another trucker had pulled in and was messing with him. But when he turned his head, someone was sitting in the seat. Owen swore the figure never looked at him, never moved, just sat there, hands folded in its lap. Said the air inside the cab went cold enough to frost his breath in seconds. He started the engine and drove. Hours passed, towns passed. Still, the figure didn't move. By dawn, Owen said the road looked unfamiliar. The highway signs made no sense, and the last thing he remembered was pulling into a gas station with a bright yellow roof. No one saw him after that, not his dispatcher, not his family. Only the story made it back. Passed through other drivers who swore they'd heard it from someone who knew someone who'd been there. Now in the present, Michael tightened his grip on the wheel. The rules of the folklore had been clear, and the CB seemed determined to remind him of them. The radio hissed, a long exhale of static, before a voice emerged. Don't look at him. Don't speak to him. The voice wasn't Owen's. It wasn't the cashier's. It wasn't anyone Michael recognized. It was low, but close, as though the speaker was leaning right over the microphone or sitting just inches from Michael's ear. He froze, eyes locked on the road. Every instinct screamed at him to glance sideways to confirm whether the seat was still empty. But the words echoed again, quieter this time and closer. "Don't look." Michael's peripheral vision caught the faintest impression of movement. A shadow where the dashboard light should have been clean. The urge to turn his head was almost unbearable, as though the thing beside him wanted him to acknowledge it. He kept his gaze forward, watching the next reflective post flash past, then another. His jaw ached from clenching. His hands had gone numb from the pressure on the wheel. The breathing was back now, soft, steady, perfectly in rhythm with the low hum of the engine. In the footage recovered later, viewers point out that in these minutes, the frost on the passenger side window began to shift, like fingerprints pressing from the inside, tracing long, deliberate arcs across the glass. Michael didn't see it. He wouldn't look. By 3:46 a.m., the fog was no longer drifting in low banks. It was all there was. The world beyond the windshield had dissolved into a white wall that pressed against the glass. Michael could no longer see the faint glow of the lane reflectors until he was nearly on top of them. He eased his speed down to 10 miles per hour, the hum of the engine deepening into a slow, uneven growl. The tires hissed softly over the wet pavement, but beyond that, the night was silent in a way that made the sound of his own breathing seem too loud, too intrusive. Then the first thump came, a heavy, deliberate impact against the underside of the truck, enough to make the coffee in his cup holder tremble. Another thump, this one closer to the cab. Michael frowned and instinctively checked his mirrors. Nothing, just fog swallowing the beam of his taillights. The next sound wasn't a thump, it was slower, more deliberate. A long, drawn-out scrape. The unmistakable sound of nails, or something like them, dragging slowly along the metal undercarriage, the pitch changing with the curve of the wheel well. The vibration traveled through the floor into the soles of his boots. Michael's eyes darted to the dashboard. No warning lights, no signs of damage, but the sound was still there, keeping pace with the slow crawl of the truck. And then, the shadow shifted. He didn't see it fully, only the way the light changed in his peripheral vision. The darkness in the passenger seat seemed to condense, take shape. The impression of a head turning. The breathing he'd been hearing for the past miles deepened, the inhale longer, the exhale just a fraction delayed, as though whatever was beside him was now aware he was listening. Michael's fingers tightened on the wheel. His eyes stayed locked on the narrow strip of road in front of him. He knew the folklore. He knew the warning, don't look at him, but the need to confirm, to see with his own eyes, was too strong. He turned his head. The seat was empty. Relief was just starting to spread through him when something caught his eye, not in the seat, but in the passenger side window. The reflection. In the glass, dimly lit by the dashboard glow, someone was sitting there, upright, perfectly still. The shape was clearer than it had been in any dashcam glitch. The outline of a head and shoulders, the faint curve of a jaw, and those eyes, dark and unblinking, fixed directly on Michael's face. He couldn't see the mouth move, but the breath against the cold glass was visible. A faint patch of fog, blooming and fading in time with the figure's inhale and exhale. Michael snapped his gaze back to the road, heart pounding against his ribs. The urge to glance again was almost unbearable, but he gripped the wheel until his hands ached, forcing himself forward. In the recovered footage, those who study it frame by frame point out that the reflection in the glass doesn't vanish when Michael turns away. It stays, watching. If you still think this is just a story, subscribe now, because real dashcam footage like this exists, and one day it might be you in that driver's seat. By 4:02 a.m., Michael's hands were stiff from the cold and the unrelenting grip on the wheel. The fog had not lifted. If anything, it was heavier now, pressing in against the cab from all sides. His chest was tight. The breathing beside him had gone quiet again, but the silence was worse. It felt intentional, as if whatever had been there was holding its breath, waiting for something. Michael decided he couldn't take the silence anymore. He reached for the CB, flicking it on with his thumb and calling for dispatch. "Control, this is Grant. Do you copy?" Static. He adjusted the frequency and tried again. "Control, come in." "Repeat." "This is Michael Grant. Do you read?" For a moment, nothing. Then a voice crackled through the speakers. It was his own voice, perfectly matched in tone and cadence. "Control, this is Grant. Do you copy?" Michael froze. His hand hovered over the mic. The voice repeated the phrase exactly with the same inflection as if playing back a recording. Then it changed. "Keep driving." The static flared, drowning the words before Michael could respond. The CB hissed one last time before cutting off completely. He let go of the mic and stared ahead. That was when he saw it, a faint warm glow bleeding through the fog in the distance. It shimmered like the neon from a truck stop canopy, its shape warping as the mist shifted. Relief threatened to break through the fear. A stop meant people, lights, noise, somewhere he could shake this, whatever it was. He pushed the truck faster, 15 miles an hour, then 20. The glow sharpened, revealing the faint outline of a building. But something about it seemed wrong. The light didn't flicker like neon or spill across the wet pavement like fluorescent tubes. It was steadier, softer, almost candle-like. In the passenger seat, the air grew heavier. Michael didn't want to look. He didn't want to confirm. But the dashcam didn't care what he wanted. It was recording. In the recovered footage, the passenger figure is now fully solid. There is no distortion, no suggestion, just a person-shaped form occupying the seat, angled slightly toward the driver. The skin appears pale under the dashboard glow, the face too smooth, almost featureless, except for two hollow sockets where eyes should be. The figure doesn't blink, doesn't move, but its head is tilted enough to catch the camera lens directly, as if aware it's being filmed. Michael kept his gaze locked on the glow ahead. He was close now, less than 200 yards. The fog thinned slightly, revealing the outline of what looked like a canopy roof. A single fuel pump stood beneath it. No other vehicles, no signs of life. And then the engine coughed, once, twice. The dashboard lights flickered, the steering wheel shuddered in his hands. The truck's hum dropped into a low, uneven rumble before cutting out completely. The cab went silent, except for the soft, steady breathing from the seat beside him. Momentum carried the truck forward, coasting toward the shadowy outline of the stop. The only sound was the faint hiss of tires rolling over wet asphalt. Michael's foot pressed on the accelerator out of instinct. Nothing. The pedal gave no response. In the final moments before the truck came to a halt, the dashcam feed caught one last, unmistakable image. The passenger turning its head fully toward the camera and smiling. When Michael opened his eyes, the world had changed. Dawn had broken, a cold, pale light filtering through the windshield. The fog was gone, the sky washed in a dull gray. He was parked. The truck sat at the far edge of a gravel lot, angled toward a row of faded fuel pumps. Weeds pushed up through cracks in the pavement. The canopy above them sagged slightly, the paint peeling away in long strips. No other vehicles. No people. No movement. Michael blinked hard, trying to remember pulling in. He couldn't. He remembered the engine cutting out, the glow ahead, the breath beside him, and then nothing. His coffee was still in the cup holder, the surface undisturbed. The dash clock read 7:11 a.m. 4 hours had vanished. He sat there for a long moment, listening. No breathing, no scrape of nails on metal. The passenger seat was empty. But his gaze drifted to the dash cam. The little red light was still on. It had been recording the entire night. Michael reached forward, fingers brushing against the chilled plastic, and rewound the footage. What he found shouldn't have been possible. A full 40 minutes of video were missing, replaced with a continuous clip of him driving. The road ahead stayed perfectly straight. The scenery never changed. And in every frame, the passenger seat was occupied. The figure never moved, never spoke. It sat in absolute stillness, its face angled toward the windshield. In the muted morning light of the footage, its skin looked paper-thin, stretched too tightly over its features. The hollows where the eyes should have been seemed darker than before, as if they absorbed the light around them. Occasionally, just at the edge of the frame, its head would turn slightly toward Michael. The smallest shift, subtle enough that you could almost dismiss it as a trick of the camera. Michael fast-forwarded through the clip, hoping to find the moment it appeared or disappeared. There wasn't one. It was simply there the entire time. The video ended with the truck rolling to a stop. Michael could be seen in the driver's seat, looking straight ahead. The passenger still sat beside him, the two of them frozen in place, as though they'd been carved from the same stillness. Michael shut off the dash cam and started the engine. The sound felt louder than it should have in the quiet lot. He pulled out slowly, gravel crunching under the tires. The fuel pump slid past on his left. The road ahead stretched empty and colorless in the early light. The passenger seat was empty. He checked once, quickly, and then forced himself to keep his eyes on the road. The relief was almost enough to make him believe it was over. Almost. As he shifted into a higher gear, his gaze flicked briefly to the side mirror. In the reflection, pale, still, and perfectly seated, the figure was there, watching. If you've watched this far without subscribing, I have to ask, why? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to check your passenger seat next time you drive alone.